I am on with audio. Oh, there's Stan.
Morning, Tim.
How are you, my friend?
I am very good, thank you.
That is awesome. All right, I'm going to make sure that this is recording, which it is. And then I'm going to set my audio recording as well.
I see you.
Fantastic.
Like any good host, you've got a sidekick with you.
Yes, I have my cat. That's Sophia.
So
she's very sweet.
If you hear the pitter patter of little paws running around here, that's gonna be Frida, our new 8-week-old dachshund puppy. Which you want to talk about a handful.
Oh, I can only imagine what it's like to get a brand new puppy and deal with that, because I think I've never had an actual puppy other than growing up as a kid, but you don't really pay attention to that as a child, you know?
No, this is in fact.
Want to see her?
Yeah, since we haven't.
Yeah.
My cohort is bringing the puppy. We've Freed is the name, but ever since we realized, that the Moxie, the Doxie from Falling Water, we think it may morph at some point.
Tell him to get ready for a cuteness overload, because here it comes.
Suzanne says, get ready for a cuteness overload.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
That's just the cutest thing you've ever seen.
That is the sweetest puppy dog. Look at her. She's like, oh. My cat's now talking.
Falling Water Doxie.
I love it. I didn't even know that was a thing. That book that all of a sudden I just see this book.
Suzanne's my local expert.
I did. I knew 3 years ago. And
really?
Yeah. And I told Stan this morning that we're either going to have to fly or we're going to have to drive her to Falling Water.
Oh, I think that would be great.
So she could be the mascot. So there you go.
I think that's great.
Sorry to interrupt.
So that's your first Zoom bomb.
I love it. Oh, she's so cute. And it was nice to see Suzanne as well. Hey, dear.
Hi. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. I love it. So this is pretty informal, Stan. We're kind of just a great conversation, and we'll both talk about stuff. If you think of something you want to talk about specifically, I figure we go for about an hour or so, and we obviously can talk for even longer than that. So, well, I'll welcome in our podcast listeners who will have joined us by now. I'm your host, Timothy Totten of the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour podcast. And I have with me my friend Stan Ecklund. And before we get into all of your bona fides and everything else, Stan, we like to start out with a little 5 not too serious architecture questions. And I ask these in no particular order. They're meant to be pretty fast, quick answers. It'll give us something to talk about later. Are you ready?
Super. Let's go.
Question number 4. Who's your favorite architect?
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay, I was hoping you weren't going to surprise me with something strange there.
We'll save the wise answers for later.
Yeah, good. Question number 2. If you could forget and never hear about any architectural style ever again, which one would that be?
International.
Ooh, that's controversial now, Stan. Okay, good. Thank you. You're giving me plenty of stuff for later. Question number 5. This one, of course, in no particular order, but this question actually causes some rifts in friendships. Creamy or crunchy?
Oh, crunchy.
Oh, I knew there was a reason that we were good friends there, Stan. Fantastic.
But I don't remember what down the creamy. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, of course, right? I mean, you can't. Question number 3. Who's an architect other than one you've already named, maybe who's still alive or whose work is still being done, that people should know more about? Like, who's being slept on?
Well, Lloyd Wright always, because of the big shadow that's cast by his father. And, this is one of those moments where I wish I had the encyclopedic memory of some other folks. There's a Wright apprentice who did a lot of work down in Atlanta. Jim Choate, who's probably going to be watching this podcast at some point, lives in one of his houses. And he's one of the guys who I feel like really got Wright in a way where he absorbed Wright without copying Wright. And if I remember the guy's name before the end,
And if we can think of it, we'll put it in the description of the
There you go.
podcast. How does that sound?
That's
And
your
our final question number one: if you could work in or live in any designed building, it can be a house, it can be a commercial space. Doesn't have to be by your favorite architect, but I assume it would be. Which one would you want to work or live in?
Well, if I could work in, I'd work in Hollyhock House, and if they'd like to offer me a job, I'd take it. If I could live in any, probably the first Jacob's house. I have a great respect. I love the Usonians, and there's so much variety in all of that. I've seen some spectacular, very large, very beautiful versions of it, but I think I would like the experience of living in the original and going from there.
Well, that's our 5 not too serious architecture questions, and it's important that we do that because I think it gives us a little bit of insight into your mind, and obviously a great connection to Hollyhock, as you said. You know, you live in the Southern California area. Was Hollyhock your first Frank Lloyd Wright building, or tell me how you interacted with Hollyhock and how that came about?
Actually, it was not my first. I was kind of a late comer to the Wright architecture world. So in spite of the fact that we have some of the most spectacular architecture in America, some would argue in the world, here in Southern California, I wasn't really into the architecture. So I was aware that Barnsdall Park was there, and I knew there was some stuff there, but that was really about it. It wasn't until I actually had a visit to Taliesin West and kind of fell in love with Wright's architecture that I said, wow, I really need to look at this stuff in my own backyard. At that point, Hollyhock House was in the middle of one of its many 5-year renovations that it's been through in the last 50 years or so. And so I spent several trips walking around the outside and peeking in windows and wanting to climb over fences, but not. And that was really my first introduction to the house. I never actually got in the house until the day of its reopening, Valentine's Day 2015, when we had the 24-hour around-the-clock dash. 6,000 people came through the house. I was one of them. Technically, I was 2 of them because I came through once. It was in the first group to go in the house and found out that you could have your camera, and all I had was my iPhone. So I came back at about 3:30 in the morning thinking, well, there won't be anybody here. It was still a 30-minute wait to get in the house, and I didn't leave until about 8:30. So I just walked around the house, watched the sun come up, and if I wasn't in love with Frank Lloyd Wright before then, I was afterwards.
You know, you talk being late to the Frank Lloyd Wright game. I think you've certainly you've made up for your time frame. You know, but a lot of us that, you know, people that will be listening or watching who might have, like me, came to Frank Lloyd Wright quite early, you know, as a teenager. You have a more interesting story, I think, and you've told me this before, but my memory is terrible. So what kind of launched you heavily into what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, we joke at the Right Attitude about how it's not the deep end. Well, I definitely did not go into the shallow end. I had, growing up, I enjoyed architecture, but I was just a gadfly. I knew what I liked. I knew what I didn't like. I knew who Frank Lloyd Wright was because I knew the name. That's all I really knew. I had contemplated, when you're at that young age, when you're trying to decide what you want to do when you grow up, architecture was one of the things on the list, but very quickly realized it took artistic skill and mathematical skill, 2 things that I was terrible at, and decided maybe I'd go elsewhere. Really wasn't until 2012 that it all came together. In January 2012, I was in Phoenix on business for Boeing and had time to kill and was looking for something to do in the Valley. And one of the things that I saw was, Frank Lloyd Wright's summer house is here. Okay. So I drove up to Taliesin West, didn't have time for a tour because I needed to catch my airplane, but had enough time to spend about 5 minutes in the parking lot, just that right there at the drop off where you enter the complex, and looked around, took a couple snapshots, got in my car, and flew home. When I started looking at the pictures, I had taken one looking over the roof line of the cabaret and the crest of the theater and the McDowell Mountains in the background, and had inadvertently captured exactly what Frank Lloyd Wright loved so much about Taliesin West, the fact that the structure complements and enhances the natural view. And so I had bought some years earlier at an Amazon sale, the Hess Weintraub, Frank Lloyd Wright, The Houses book, which is kind of a coffee table book. And so it was sitting on my coffee table. So I pulled it out and started looking through it. And I thought, man, there's some kind of interesting stuff here. But even that didn't really light the fire. That summer, though, my mother passed away. And she had always extolled the values of travel. You need to see things. You need to experience things. And she left me a small amount of money, not enough to make a change in my lifestyle, but enough to facilitate a couple of years of travel. And so I thought, you know what, I'm in her honor, I'm going to go out and see some of this stuff. So the next January, I spent a week in Arizona seeing the Taliesin West several times, and the things were there. That summer, I went to Falling Water. That fall, I went to Wisconsin, and basically I haven't slowed down ever since.
Now, I think, was that Wisconsin trip the one where you and I met?
Yes, I went out to Taliesin and I met this jovial dude from Florida that either I was stalking him or he was stalking I'm not sure which. And then we did it again the next year, which was a little freaky on it.
Didn't we follow each other from like one place to the next? Like,
yeah,
it was
we were going from Taliesin down to the Lauren House in Rockford.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's where I sort of said, maybe the universe is telling me I should say hello and get to know this guy. Now, what amazes me is that in 2012 or 13, you had one book, right?
Right.
Yeah. So are these books about other people? Or are these that are all around you in this picture?
Most of what you can see, everything in the bookshelf over here is Frank Lloyd Wright. Everything back here is Frank Lloyd Wright. There's a little bit of other type of stuff over here towards the window, but I think I have 450 books on Wright, and maybe another 125 on other architects whose interests have caught my attention over time. As I grew in my appreciation for Mr. Wright's architecture, I realized that there were others who were influenced by him. There were others who were of different styles who I felt if I wanted to consider myself a more well-rounded architectural fan, that I needed to take the time to know. And so I've studied some of those as well, but nothing to the depth of Mr. Wright.
Well, that's kind of helped me as well. For many years, I was sort of obsessed with Wright, and there's plenty, obviously, to go see and experience and everything else. And then I think I was looking at some buildings at Florida Southern College, because, I have the Florida experience of your Southern California experience. In Florida, I said, oh, these are interesting buildings. And somebody said, well, those are by Neil Schweitzer, who took over for Wright after Wright died as the campus architect. And then going to Arkansas and seeing some E. Fay Jones work and some of the other, I go, oh, maybe there are other people that I can also appreciate. Now, I went certainly to apprentices first. That kind of helps because as much as I like Frank Lloyd Wright, I also am really taken by his philosophy, the design philosophy, which doesn't matter who's doing it if the philosophy is being followed. So I think you and I are both sort of sympathetic on the Usonian houses being sort of our favorites, or at least they're my favorite of all of his styles. I mean, would you say that's true for you, that Usonian's probably has a little more of a personal touch to you?
Yeah, yes, in large part because I think of the target audience. One of the elements I respect out of Mr. Wright the most is his attempts with an S to meet the needs of the common man. If you look at architecture in general, and certainly the people who became what we would now think of as the starchitects, there was not a lot of attempt to come up with a solution for Joe Every Guy. And from the American systems built through the Usonians, through the urban prefabs, Wright continually took swings at that same problem. Now, you could argue that he never solved it, and Levittown is the quote solution. But the fact that he never stopped trying means a lot. So that's one of the reasons I think the Usonians appeal. The Erdmans, the urban prefabs, I think appeal to me. I think it's very unfortunate that those didn't. I think you could take the model for the Erdman prefab today and put a model home out there and sell those things. I think they would fit right in a world that is dying for things that have that mid-mod feel to it. I think those things would sell like hotcakes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting sometimes when I go see a Wright property and I think about how experimental his work was, and then I think, you know, oh well, that he's just unusual. Then I go to like Schindler's house there in California, or go elsewhere, and I go, oh, the rest of them were just as experimental. You can't get near a Bruce Goff house without going, oh wow, really experimental. So in some ways, I can usually tell when I'm in a not Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian idea or something, because there's just something a bit off in terms of the scales or the delicate balance. There does seem to be, and maybe you've recognized this, I have certainly, that even in a lot of his big prairie houses, there's a delicacy actually to either the scale or the size or the scope of certain things. And sometimes I go, oh, he just went way too small here. And then I think part of that is more of on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I've walked through many a Usonian and cursed the grid that he chose and said, you know, an extra 6 inches would have gone a long ways here, Frank. But there's, I think the thing that usually stands out to me the most is when you're walking through a lot of the either apprentices or Wright wannabes or some of his contemporaries, either they're trying to copy him too hard, and when you try to copy, you usually end up creating something that's clearly a copy. Yeah. Or they're trying so hard to be as experimental as Wright appears to be that they kind of they're like the Roadrunner when he runs off the cliff and doesn't realize he's done it until he looks down, and you know, I feel that a lot of times when I see some of Schindler's work. I feel that way a lot when I see some of Bruce Goff's work. They both did spectacular stuff and they were very experimental, but they also had cases where they built things that, you know, that one guy could live in that house, but I don't think anybody else could. And so you wonder almost who were they trying to please? How much of it was trying to please a specific client? How much of it was trying to develop something that could be used going forward? And how much of it was just because it's something that they thought was going to be fun to do?
Yeah, I think when I think about my own attempts to study architecture and potentially become an architect, which I did exactly as long as Frank Lloyd Wright did in college, which is about 2 semesters. I realized early enough that what I loved about Frank Lloyd Wright wasn't exactly the ornament, although that's lovely and wonderful. And it wasn't, I realized that I was merely copying the forms rather than understanding the underlying philosophy that led to those forms. That the things he was thinking about were 5 steps ahead of where I was. I was merely copying, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a cantilevered fireplace? Sure. And not understanding the reasons why he would do that. And I think when you go to experience his spaces is when you start to recognize, oh, here's why he did those things. Now I understand the emotion he's trying to get. You know, obviously in a very short period of time, you went from not really knowing much about Frank Lloyd Wright, recognizing the value of what he gave, collecting all these books, going to Hollyhock, and then that led to volunteering there because you have a full-time job doing other work in the aerospace industry, but you also have what sometimes strikes me as a right. Well, I hope 2020 has been a very interesting year, hasn't it? Yeah. So, but you put in a lot of effort at Hollyhock, and you started volunteering there pretty early, right?
Yeah. Basically, as soon as it opened in 2015, once it reopened, I knew before. I knew before it opened that I wanted the opportunity to give back. You know, I go to so many different public sites, and it's such a wonderful experience. And I felt like if you're going to do that, then you need to be willing to give back. Unfortunately, with as much wonderful architecture as we have in Southern California, Hollyhock House is the only right that is open for that sort of thing. So that was really the only opportunity to do that. I hope that there will come a day when we'll start having house walks of the nature of what you see coming out of the home and studio. I would love to be involved with a Wright, Lloyd Wright, Schindler, Neutra, type thing. And Lord knows we have the properties to do it.
Yeah, it would be a week long. Holy cow! It would be. There's so much good.
Yeah, the walk part of the Wright walk would probably be a little bit hard, but I live for the day that we have more opportunity. But for today, the opportunity is limited to Hollyhock House, so I'm as involved there as I can be.
Now, you've been a docent there, and I think you've taken part in training docents. I think that was part of some of what you've done.
I for the last 3 or 4 years, I've done a kind of a 40-minute run through of the career of Frank Lloyd Wright, and if you can cram Frank Lloyd Wright into 40 minutes, you've done a pretty good job. But
I don't know. How do you do that? Stan, tell us the secret, because I can't do that. That's amazing.
I was just seeing a thing the other day. There's a streaming service out there that basically does 40 slides in 400 seconds, something like that. I might need to use those guys, because that's pretty much how it works. You break the career down. I think I broke the career down into 7 phases, and then I show a couple examples of his architecture from those phases. Talk a little bit about where he was in terms of his life and some of the challenges that he faced. And hope that when it's all said and done, they've got a little bit more appreciation of the fact that there's more to Frank Lloyd Wright than what he did on Olive Hill.
Wow. Well, that's actually a really important feature, because I've gone to all but 3 of the public sites in the world, Frank Lloyd Wright sites. And, not as quickly as you went to so many of them, but I mean, I have over years. And one of the things I really find fascinating is the number of times a docent will say to me, they'll tell me all of this stuff and be such an expert about their property, and beautifully done. I mean, virtually every one of them does a really marvelous job, and the 1 or 2 that haven't, I would never call out. So what I'm always impressed by, though, is I will say to them, so tell me where else you've gone. And they might be within 50 miles of another Frank Lloyd Wright site, and they'll say, I've never been anywhere else.
Sure.
And I feel like that's it's fine, because they're helping in their community and they're doing it on a micro level. But I also think, gosh, if you were able to see just the couple that are near you,
right,
that you would be amazed that you would actually maybe make even more connections, because the people coming to visit you certainly have been to those other places,
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I've taken to doing in the docent training, we train about 25 docents a year coming into Hollyhock. And I'll ask what brought them. Did they come because they were a Frank Lloyd Wright fan? Did they come because they're an architecture fan? In a lot of cases, they came because they just have a civic duty, and this was something that was nearby. And so while we have our share of docents that this is the only Frank Lloyd Wright that they know, we also are blessed to have a good core cadre of folks who have been to as many or more than I have. And it's good, because at any given time at the house, we have 3 docents on duty, and we there always tends to be, I think it's more by chance than anything else, one of those docents is one of the ones who knows a lot. So there's always someone you can refer to and back. But I'm a huge fan of the idea of broadening one's scope. You can know everything there is to know about yours, but if you don't really know where it fits in context with the rest, of the process. I mean, we're talking about a 70-year career here. You really need to understand where you fit in that chain. And I would encourage any docent who gets the opportunity to spread their wings and see what's out there.
That's actually one of the really beneficial parts of being a docent, is you and I both know we can go to another Frank Lloyd Wright site and just mention, oh, well, I'm a docent at and you
Yes.
get some, it almost gets you not free entry, obviously, but it gets you that sort of, oh, let's be a little friendlier to this person, because there's a camaraderie, you know, and there are great people all over the country who are volunteering in their community. So many of them aren't paid. Obviously, some of the big sites have been able to pay for docents, but it's impressive the people who just, because they care about that community, or maybe they had a connection to the family who owned that particular house or building. You know, that's always a really nice connection. Do you have, oh gosh, this is going to sound terrible to ask. You don't have to say this, but do you have a favorite public site other than Hollyhock? I mean, even if it's not about the docents, just it brings you back because you need to keep going back to it. Maybe that'll give you an out so you don't make it sound like you're...
You know, Taliesin West, because that's where I fell in love with the architecture, is always going to be a special place to me. I've probably been there more than any other Wright site other than Hollyhock House, partly because of the distance, but also I've had the opportunity to go up there for several of the Andrew Peelich photo workshops and other things, spend the night in the Sun Cottage, you know, so that's always going to be a favorite of mine. But I love seeing how some of the sites, some of the smaller sites that have become public sites only recently, the Christian House or the Laurent House, you know, and you see how they're learning and growing and advancing their programs, and I always get a kick out of that. And so I think those are the places that I think deserve the support, maybe more so than the larger sites, because they're the ones who really don't have the bandwidth to absorb tough days. You know, as tough as it is for the foundation right now, and to be able to finance Taliesin and Taliesin West and stuff. How would you like to have just your one house, and you're in the middle of doing your renovations or putting on a new roof or doing whatever, and your finances just absolutely dry up, as we're seeing right now. So those are the ones that if we're gonna talk up places, those are the guys who deserve the extra boost.
You know, as you'll know, we had a tour originally planned in April, and we put it off to June, but we had to just cancel it, going to Falling Water and Kentuck Knob, and to go see Heather and Tom at Polymath Park. You know, and they've just moved their second Frank Lloyd Wright house there. Yes. And the Lindholm House, right? What's the name? Mantilia or a Mantilla?
Yeah, it's the Lindholm House. Mantilla is the name that Wright gave it. That's the name that they use at Polymath Park. So I will defer to them. I use the Lindholm House because Mantilla means house in the pines, and well, the pines aren't there anymore. So, although they're trying, they're bringing pines in there. I respect that.
You
but
know, I think
they've also brought in they just brought in a Lloyd Wright house from up in Minnesota. So yeah, they have their hands full. They're creating quite a destination, and with Heather's cooking, people are always coming back.
Yeah, but I think for them specifically, you know, they're a private couple doing this, you know, and now they're at 2 apprentice houses, 2 Frank Lloyd Wright houses, pretty soon a Lloyd Wright house, and there's no tours right now, and there's no people coming in, or at least there hasn't been during the pandemic situation of 2020. So I don't know when people will be listening to this, so I don't want to go too crazy about. So back in history, this time in history, you know, I worry for them for that purpose, and I think any attention we can bring to them is, you know, going to be really helpful, especially when people are able to move around the country again and get out there. I really want to encourage people to go see what they've done, because they've done as sympathetic of a job as I think you can to moving a Frank Lloyd Wright house and trying the best you can to set it where it you know, in a way that's sympathetic to how it was originally done.
Yeah. Well, and that's a, you know, there's a delicate dance that you have to walk when you're in that sort of position. I think most of us agree we would prefer to see the houses stay right where they were, but that's not always possible. Sometimes you're staring down demolition, and we'd rather see them moved than be demolished. At the same time, you don't want to see the moved houses turned into some kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright Disneyland. And I think they've done a really good job of because they've got this land that was designed really to be a Wright apprentice designed community. They can take advantage of the original layout that Peter Berenson had created for them, and build upon that and use that as a guide. And so I think that they're doing a good job. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go in the future. I know they've got lots of plans for education and conference and things like that. So it can be very exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Now, you're a lot more connected now because did you accidentally start the Right Attitude Facebook group? I mean, was that on purpose?
That was absolutely an accident. Yeah, well, there had been when I was but a wee Frank Lloyd Wright student, lo those many years ago. And I'm on the internet looking for Frank Lloyd Wright resources. And one of the things that I discovered as a something of a Facebook junkie was the Frank Lloyd Wright appreciation page. And it had about 25,000 members and lots of pictures of Frank Lloyd Wright. It was very interesting for someone who knew very little to learn a lot in a hurry. But there was a controversy between the owner administrator of the group and some of the places that the Wright sites that she was associated with, and was kind of given a choice and was forced, unfortunately, to disband the group on short notice. Like literally the morning we were saying, the group's going down today. And so I thought about it and I said, well, we have all these people, they're going to go someplace. Maybe this is an opportunity to do something. So I quickly made a Facebook group, didn't like the original name, thought for about 5 minutes, what can I do? Come up with a name and go, ooh, attitude. I like attitude, the right attitude. And before the group went down, threw something up, said, hey, this one's going away, but this one's coming in, and kind of went from there. By design, we've tried to keep it a little bit highbrow. It is a closed group. We do control the membership. Now that membership is at something like 5,000 people now, so there are those who would argue we're not keeping that close a control on it. But we want it to be more than just pretty pictures of Frank Lloyd Wright houses. We were blessed to have very early a lot of people with gravitas in the community, whether they be homeowners or apprentices or scholars or people of standing in the Wright community who could bring expertise to answer questions and things like that. And then since then we've attracted quite a group of regulars who participate, and then many thousands who are satisfied to simply see what the discussions are, learn as they go along, participate when they feel that they're ready. And I think it's turned into it's something I'm very proud of.
Did you have any idea that it would get to 5,000 plus members, since you were kind of limiting the type of people that could be included in?
No, and I guess maybe this is an indication of the popularity of Frank Lloyd Wright as an architect, even amongst people who don't know architecture. As a closed group, every one of those 5,000 members has to be approved. I have to push a button that says you are in. And I would say for every member of the group, there are 3 or 4 that have been turned down. I mean, it's that big. Facebook will throw up advertisements for all groups, and periodically, if you're in a mid-mod architecture group, there'll be a link saying, hey, the Right Attitude, and somebody clicks on it because they just want another group. We do, like most closed groups do, there are several questions that you have to answer on the way in so we can gauge your interest and your engagement to the process. And you'll get a lot of people who just say yes, 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 or just put a dot, and then you realize right away that was someone who was simply looking to join one more group. But we also, I have many times gotten a smile on my face when I'll say one of the questions is, what's your association with the Frank Lloyd Wright world? Are you a part of any organizations? And someone will say, well, yes, I'm the executive director at such and such Wright site, or the president of this organization, or I was an apprentice to Frank Lloyd Wright for 3 years. So I get the little kid giddy thing going when that stuff happens, and I think that helps to keep it in large part the group of record for the serious Frank Lloyd Wright fans. And there's still enough bandwidth that we can take in those people who just want to learn more and kind of sit on the sidelines but absorb as they go.
I'm always impressed when there's a discussion that you'll get someone comment and somebody else will be like, well, no, I think that's wrong. And in my mind, I'm going, they probably know because they own that house. Like they might actually know the answer to this question. Like maybe you shouldn't tell them they're wrong. So I try to be less responsive because I think, oh gosh, there are people who really do know this answer firsthand, or maybe they did they helped with the drawings for that, or they helped with the restoration 10 years ago, or it's their cousin's house and they go there every Thanksgiving. And the people who we've been able to connect with in parts of the country that maybe no longer are really actively involved, but to be able to have that connection for those people. And we've gotten some great information on the page. I mean, there's been some really good conversations and stuff that probably would have just been lost to history had it not been discussed on the page.
Yeah, I'm very proud of some of the stuff we've done there. We have our moments that are less proud. I'm usually in the middle of those. And quite frankly, I have to remember sometimes that while I created the group and I serve as its benevolent dictator, I am by no means the most knowledgeable person in that group. And there are many, many, many conversations where I, like a lot of those other people, need to just sit on the sidelines and let the people who know what they're talking about talk. And which is a wonderful experience as an administrator, to see that people who come through there and the depth of knowledge that people have. I mean, there are folks who have been even ones who are simply fans who have been studying Frank Lloyd Wright for 30 or 40 years, and they bring a lot to the table, even having had nothing to do directly with Wright or any of his architecture. And then homeowners, I would guess we probably have 30 homeowners in the group if I had to guess. And those are just ones that I know about. They don't necessarily have to identify themselves as a homeowner as they come through. But it's a wonderful opportunity when you do have a question and someone can say, well, I don't know, let's ask the homeowner. They're a member of the group. And it provides an opportunity that I think you just don't normally get. And we certainly want to take full advantage of that, while at the same time preserving and recognizing that it's that kind of a special entity that can get away from you if you're not careful.
Because, I mean, it is still social media, right? I mean, you're still dealing with, and sometimes you're still dealing with the fact that it's social media and that some people might come across a post for the right attitude right after they just had a heavy political argument with someone on another post, or they've just seen something that they were not expecting, and so they get to a right attitude post, and that might, sometimes I think it bleeds over a little, the attitude bleeds over. But then I also noticed there are times where someone will say, there was a very interesting discussion about politics, but it was about Wright and politics. Mm-hmm. And the person tried to say, Frank Lloyd Wright's not about politics at all. You shouldn't have any political discussion. And I think, oh, this person really doesn't know about Frank Lloyd Wright, because he was extremely political, and many people might not appreciate what his politics were if they were to have sat down with him and had that discussion. So they can like his pretty things, and maybe they don't recognize that he was a political person. Not that that means today's politics needs to bleed over into it, obviously, but it's interesting that happens sometimes.
Yeah, and the politics of the day are such that it's very difficult to have just common conversations about things completely unrelated that they don't drift in. But we have had some, I think, very good political discussions about where Wright is, how Wright would see things today, and for the most part, do a good job of keeping any of the politics of the day out of it. But it's, we also see those threads that when I'm sitting at my desk and all of a sudden the pop-ups are hitting saying this person, 5 people just reported a post. I can usually guess what's going on.
You know, as a more populist storyteller, and I kind of think of myself as my goal is to tell people all of the sort of sides of Frank Lloyd Wright and sort of weave a bit of a Shakespearean / soap opera story about him as a way to sort of gateway them into actual architectural experience. I love to start out either press releases or my own talks and say, if Frank Lloyd Wright were alive today, I think he'd have a Trump-style Twitter account. Like, I feel like Wright would enjoy the immediacy of Twitter or something like that, where he could just say what he wanted to say and lots of people would listen to it. Because he certainly liked people listening to him.
Well, and I think he would also appreciate the fact that it represents the latest, the kind of the bleeding edge in technology. We see throughout his career that he was the master of his own image, and he was the master of using the media and the tools of the day to carve that image and to spread that image. I mean, his autobiography and his willingness to adjust the autobiography, adjust some of the facts in the autobiography as the years went by to better present his image. The fact that as an 89-year-old man, he's sitting there with Mike Wallace chain smoking away on this new media of television. I mean, his grasp of a brand new media that soon and that completely, because he did quite a few television interviews, just shows that he understood the power. And so he would see what's going on now. And while a lot of us look at Twitter and think, oh God, it's just 140 characters, can't these people just shut up? I think he would absolutely understand it. Like, because let's face it, he was the master of the quip, right? So
oh yes,
this is a guy who would absolutely crush it with 140 characters.
You know, when I think about, you made a great point about technology with Frank Lloyd Wright. I keep thinking, what would he do with 3D printing technology today? And I was in another episode of this podcast. My guest was Kim Bixler, and she was talking about a friend of hers who became an architect because he visited the Boynton House that she grew up in Rochester, and now he's working with a company that's 3D printing houses. Yeah. And I just happen to have a 3D printed sprite. I know, if you're lucky, there might be one coming to you at some point. Because now it has very little, the detail isn't as good, and I'm sure that no one paid a royalty to anyone, so this will not be sold to anybody. It would be just a gift if I sent it to you. I can imagine what really amazing things he could come up with being able to use that technology.
So I'm fortunate enough, well, right now not, but when I'm actually going to my office in a building at Boeing, I am fortunate enough to work directly next door to one of our 3D printing additive manufacturing labs. And of course, we're so proud of it. The lab has big windows, so you can watch the stuff as it's literally being fabricated in front of you. And I can remember seeing a video 4 or 5 years ago now of a Russian 3D printer, and it was a huge thing, and it was extruding concrete like toothpaste out of a tube and creating a house, but it looked like a house built out of 6-inch diameter toothpaste, right? The things that we built next door to my office, the level of detail and the level of skill that's involved, they're creating perfect spheres with a perfect sphere inside of it that's rolling around free, right? That you literally could not make any other way. And I firmly believe that that's today. If you wanted to make that, at a level of detail that was as pristine as the original, you absolutely could. I mean, the technology does. And so to see Wright's willingness throughout his career to take technology and push it right to the edge, sometimes to his own detriment, tells me that he would have been all over that stuff. The choice of materials would be interesting, because it's probably not the most organic in sense of of something coming from the ground as he liked. But I think the appeal of the technology would overcome any concerns he had about the rest of it. And when you see the things that he managed to create using nothing more than a hammer and nails, imagine the stuff that could come out of his mind for something that has so few limitations. I think the things he could have done would be amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm continually impressed when I think how much his brain was thinking far ahead, that we even still use all of his designs for futuristic buildings. And when they want to show what would it look like in the future when we're genetically engineering people, they go to Marin County Civic Center. Which may be, as this may be controversial, it may be as much Wes Peters as Frank Lloyd Wright. There's a lot of circles in Marin County. There's a lot of influence, and I think some people forget that the number of buildings Wright put out quite often meant it was a group effort. Yes, the architect's name goes on it, but there are good ideas from lots of people, which is why we can see apprentice work and go, oh, John Howe. Yeah, I could live in a John Howe house tomorrow. Yeah, great, let's go. It would have the same feeling.
And that's the case. That's the case with I think with any architectural firm. Success drives that as a necessity. We talked about the class that I teach our Hollyhock docents. The last chapter I refer to as Wright Incorporated, because this is a point in time when I shake them out of my sleeve. It's clear that the level of involvement of the master in any particular design is going to diminish the more designs you put out. It's just the natural, and that's true for anybody. I mean, if you hire Foster and Partners or Richard Meyer or any of these folks, you're going to get their insight and you're going to get their genius, but you're not going to get their hand on a drawing or on a key. You're paying for the firm, and so when I look at some of the later designs, there's no question you can see this is a John Howe influence, or this is a Wes Peters influence, this is an Ogivana influence. I think that's just part of it, and in spite of that, there's some very spectacular stuff. Look at the Likes house, right? I mean, the Likes house was little more than a couple, I think a single sketch on Wright's drawing board when he went off to the hospital for some minor procedure. And John Rattenberry was able to take that and, using his skill and his knowledge of how Mr. Wright would work, and develop a spectacular design.
So you've got, I'm trying to think about, when we look at the Wright attitude, specifically, it's opened a lot of doors for you, I would think, right? I mean, do you find that in just a short period of time, you've become a larger figure in the Frank Lloyd Wright world, even though I know you weren't necessarily aiming for that? And is that a little weird at times?
It is. The first time that I went to, the first time someone recognized me as being that, I was at Oberlin, the Welsheimer Johnson house, and Fred Unwin, who was one of the primary guys there. I was just walking up, shooting pictures well in advance of my tour, and apparently Fred had looked at the list of people who were going to be there and knew I was going to be there, and he comes running up, Stan, and I'm like looking behind me, and it was a surreal moment, and which one that has happened repeatedly since then. But also, it does open a certain number of doors. You do. It carries a certain weight. I think sometimes it probably carries more weight than it deserves. I'm known for being the ringleader of this group, but I'm certainly not the expert on the topic. I think that the people who are there are the ones who do that. But if someone wants me to speak, I've had the good fortune to speak on Wright a number of times. I've had the chance to speak with you on some of your stops. If it opens those types of doors to me, I'm certainly grateful, and I'll try not to embarrass myself or the people who chose to open the door for me.
Well, that's the thing that I sometimes deal with, is knowing that there are people who know so much more than me. Mm-hmm. Is to not feel like an imposter, because I know I'm not. I mean, I know what I'm talking about. I've researched it. I've read it. Sometimes I'll get somebody in an audience who I know lived some of it, you know? And I always ask them later, please tell me I was right. Like the information that I shared was accurate. I don't want to be sharing a version of Wright's story that just isn't true. I would hate to be doing that. Right. But I never met the man. I didn't have that connection. And so I have to tell the stories that other people tell. And I usually try to say, well, I'm telling you Edgar Taffel's version of the Falling Water creation story. And there are others, and they're both different. And I think they're both true. And in the way that they can be, you know, that one of the things I love about Frank Lloyd Wright, one of his sayings is that the truth is more important than the facts. And if I can be truthful with what I share with people, I try to, but I also really love the fact that there'll be times that I'll be at a store or somewhere or visiting, and someone will say, "Oh, Tim," and they talk to me as if we're dear friends. Mm-hmm. And then I'll say, "How do I know you?" And they say, "Well, I was at your Frank Lloyd Wright talk. I was the 27th row back, 8 people in." Well, I don't know you. Let's get to know each other now, because I have no idea who you are.
Oh, it's like a minor celebrity thing, and you either become comfortable with it or you don't. I think I'm reasonably comfortable with it, and I try to make sure that I don't make it any bigger than it really is. It's interesting though that you said one thing that has always struck me: the things that you hear or the things that you say, and you have someone in your presence who is more knowledgeable than you. I love those opportunities. You know, I've been fortunate enough to have. I pick up stories over time about Hollyhock House. I love a good story. And so I want to be able to share those with visitors, but I'm also very cautious about vetting the stories. I mean, there are so many apocryphal tales. I mean, how many different Wright sites have you heard the dripping from the ceiling and moving the chair? You know, I mean, at least a dozen. And so I'll pick up stories, and when I get the opportunity to sometimes meet with the people or meet with the people who would be in a position to know, to me, that's just golden. The one story that I had always told was about the furniture in the living room at Hollyhock House. Our original the beautiful couch and torchiere set had been lost at some point in the past, and there's still some debate about when exactly that was lost, but pre-World War II. And we had heard the story that we had a docent who was a former Wright apprentice for about 2 weeks, had left the fellowship by mutual agreement with him and Mrs. Wright, gone on to become an architect, and after he retired became a docent at Hollyhock House. And having looked at the few photos that exist of the furniture and some sketches that Rudolf Schindler had made, keeping in mind that the original drawings no longer exist, he felt he was able to reproduce the drawings and make a set that we could make furniture from. And he did, and Jim I. Pekin made the furniture, and that's the furniture that's in the living room today. And it's such a wonderful story. But it's one of those things that you say, is that really true? Well, and then I got to meet the gentleman, Rod Grant, and heard the story and heard details that made it an even better story. And I was able to say that not only can I tell you the story, but I've heard it from the guy who did it. And then here just recently, we had a case where part of the story that I'd been told by Rod was that some pieces of the original furniture still existed, and that at some point in time, he had seen them, the 2 little end tables, there's a pair of writing tables at the back of the furniture, and he had seen them bolted together as a single table on auction someplace, and that he and the then curator had looked at them, validated them, but then it was one of these cases where after the sale, they kind of disappeared back into the ether because The auction house doesn't have to say where they came from or where they went or what they sold them for. And so you think, well, okay, maybe that one's just a little bit too unlikely, until the owner of the table showed up 6 months ago and offered them back to us. So the stories that are out there, and every Wright site has them. It's wonderful when you can validate the stories because you want to be able to tell them. But then when they come true for you like that, that's just a phenomenal experience.
So how far off was the furniture he created? Since you have some original back now.
Well, it's funny, and Rod is a proud man, and he made these, and the furniture, the drawings he made, and the furniture that Jim Ipekian made is spectacular. It really is. And when they lined the two tables up and put them on the original furniture, took the reproductions off, the back legs came out like an inch further in one direction and an inch and a half further in the other direction. And so because I know Rod and we communicate through an email chain, I took some pictures of the new furniture, the old furniture in the new place, and you can see in the carpet where the old furniture had been, so you can see the difference. And oh my goodness, that can't be, they could not have been that far off. So the level of pride was phenomenal. But I think that all that really goes to show is that you're dealing with a craftsman. And when you're dealing with a craftsman, they have a lot of faith in their own skills and in their own workmanship, and vastly justified in this case.
Oh yeah, the furniture is amazing in that living room, and I still think it's at a certain time of day, it's probably one of the best rooms that Wright did. I mean, you've gotten to be there at all sorts of times a day. I mean, is that?
I certainly think so. It's a spectacular room because it's unlike any of the rooms that Wright did. Wright did a number of very large linear living rooms. If you go to the Met in New York and you see the little living room that's laid out there, like so many of them, it's long. You're kind of coming in from one end. There's a fireplace at the other end. It's designed to be linear. And when you come to Olive Hill, you realize that the house was perfectly set up for that exact same type of a living room, where you enter from one end and you have the fireplace at the other end, except that that's where the sunset is. And if there's one thing that Frank Lloyd Wright is not going to do, it's going to be to block nature, right? He would, however, compete with nature. So he effectively rotates the room 90 degrees on axis. So now the short axis of the room is the primary axis, and he rotates the fireplace away from that opening where the sunset was. But then that now puts him in the position of having to compete with nature. And he does it very effectively. He gives you the fireplace with the bas relief, the moat, the beautiful skylight up above, the four natural elements, everything he does in that room to focus your attention. And he does it all without ruining the sunset view. What that gives us is this room where, as the sun goes down, especially late in the season when you've got that wonderful yellowy winter sun, you get deep penetration of the sun into the room. It's that yellow color. I tell folks that it's the color of buttered toast, and it's spectacular. There is one picture that anytime anybody wants to use a picture of the inside of Hollyhock House, they all grab the same picture. It was shot by Joshua White back in 2015 when they were doing some, they cataloged the house right after the last renovation so they could have a good record of it. And he's standing in the alcove between the music room and the living room, and he's shooting through the living room into the alcove on the other side. So the living room is kind of off to your right, and the sun is coming through from right to left, and it's that beautiful yellow, and it's just amazing. I've had the privilege of shooting that house a number of times by myself. I shot it once with Andrew Peelage, and I'm still trying to get that shot because that you want to talk the money shot, that's the money shot of that house. But it just shows you Wright's understanding of how nature works with the architecture, in that you can be standing in that room in any of the four seasons at different times of day, and you will see a dozen different iterations of that room. One of the things that I love, there's a lay light, a skylight in the room, and there's behind the lay light is two incandescent bulbs, little incandescent bulbs, so that if you're there at night, you can backlight the lay light and you'll be able to see the beautiful art glass. Now, Wright could have put just one bulb there, but he chose to put two. And as a result, when the light comes through the lay light, there's some wood framing that holds the art glass in place. And because there's two bulbs, you get two sets of light coming through, and it creates this diamond hatch pattern on the front of the fireplace right above the bas relief. And I saw that one time and I thought, well, that's pretty clever. I wonder if he thought about that, if he knew that would happen. And then you look at the bas relief, and right there at the bottom of the bas relief is a section of what looks like hills using the exact same angle cross-hatched pattern. And you realize, damn right he knew it was coming. He did exactly how he planned it. And just those are the kinds of details that you see in any Wright structure, that you can just go into one little corner of a building and look at something and you think, did he really think that through? Yes, he really did.
You know, I've been in enough of prairie-style houses that have been restored with the beautiful wall texture, and you know, Hollyhock is a bit of a transition, right, mm-hmm. between prairie and elsewhere. And you understand when you can see them freshly done and have the light coming through. You understand why he chose those colors and that sort of harvest feel, and the wheats and the golds and the greens, and all of that feels so warm. Like Hollyhock, that photograph is very warm, obviously, but then also, even when I'm there and can't get that picture, I still feel that when the sun comes through. Like that room is sort of alive. The walls are alive. The color, I mean, certainly some of the gold work also helps with that. But, you know, you really do feel like the room is a warm, organic type of experience.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. It's the same colors. In a lot of ways, it's the same colors that he used earlier in his prairie school phase, but because this is that transition, he uses them in a different way. So, for example, the primary color that you see in there in most of the rooms and in the hallways, it appears at first to be kind of an avocado green sort of a color, but when you look closely at it, you realize it's actually two colors. It's very much that sagey green that he loved so much, and then more of a harvest gold. And in the process of developing the wall, they basically had the two different tints one on each hand, and they're working the two of them simultaneously to get this kind of basically the effect that your grandmother was always trying to get when she was faux finishing everything, except this was for real. Stumbling, they call the process, because you have to stumble like you're drunk so you don't leave a pattern. Yeah. But when you look at it closely, you realize that up close, these are the exact same colors that you'll see in a Roby house or in a Meyer May or someplace like that. But here in this transition, it's being used in a completely different way, which I think is just brilliant.
So as we start to wrap this up, tell me what's we might not know right now when things will open and when people can tour again, but even before the pandemic sort of forced people to back off, there were some new things happening at Hollyhock. Mm-hmm. What's new and exciting at Hollyhock that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, I will share this as Stan the docent. I'm by no means the official voice of Hollyhock House. But this is a very exciting time for the house. Even before this happened, we had a transition in the curator's seat. Abby Brock is our new curator there, and I'm sure she brings lots of really good new ideas. She's kind of a new generation that embraces the technology. She was responsible for getting, for example, a number of our drawings and some of the perspective views that we have, getting them digitized and put online. One of the nice things about being a 1919 Wright design is we predate the foundation, so we have, for the most part, all of our own drawings. And so now there are 89 drawings available online for anybody to see. We have as part of our effort to open the rest of the house, as you know, we only have about a third of the house open because of ADA concerns. As part of our attempt to meet the good faith requirement of the ADA, we've developed our virtual accessibility experience, which will allow someone who can't necessarily get to the rest of the house an opportunity to see what's up there. But also because it is an online presence, anyone can go and see this and basically maneuver your way through the house. It's very similar to these the virtual walkthroughs that you see realtors doing for houses today, where you can literally step on the circles and walk through a house. It's very much the same thing. And the photography is so good. You can be standing in the library and focusing and see the names on the spines of the book. I mean, that's how good. And both of those are available online now. The house has been participating in the virtual walkthroughs that a lot of the sites have been sharing through. I'm not sure if it's the foundation or the conservancy that's been overseeing that. So we've had a number of those out there, and then just in ways to keep the docents busy, we've created a virtual book club for the docents. So we're reading through different Wright books. I think we're doing David Gephardt's Romanza right now. In fact, I have to speak on it Saturday, so I better finish reading it. I read it a couple years ago, but I need to go back and hit it. But it's going to be very interesting to see how things are going forward. You know, the reality is that a lot of the things that we did, the ways that we presented our house, and just aren't going to work anymore. You can't just open the front door and let 30 people come in and free range graze. You know, do we have to go to more guided tours? Do we have to go to some way to enforce, or how will we enforce social distancing? I mean, these are questions I think every site is going to have to face. Some of them will have it easier than others. I very much look forward to seeing how we choose to deal with it. I think the fact that we do have a new leadership regime means that they'll probably be open to more interesting and different solutions to the problem than perhaps the old one might have. I don't know, but I'm optimistic. But this is a good time. It's going to be a good time on Olive Hill. Our Residence A renovation continues. Anyone who was at the Conservancy's soiree on the Hill last fall got the opportunity to tour the house and see how far the renovations have come there. I think we're probably still another 2 to 3 years away, but we look forward to being able to open up this kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright, Rudolph Schindler hybrid that has really never been open to the public in a restored condition. I've heard good things about some projects that are in the works, or at least in the negotiation phase, for a particularly well-known, I won't mention him because I don't know that we're going to do it, but a particularly well-known virtual modeler known to the Wright world, who is contemplating doing some models of the Olive Hill complex had it been fully developed, as it was not. So there's a lot of good stuff on the horizon. It's going to be a good couple years up in front of us.
That is really exciting. Well, hey, Stan, I think it's been a great hour. I don't know if you realize we've covered an hour, but we've had some great conversation. We probably could have gone for 3 more hours, right? And so I know you'll be a guest on the podcast again in the near future, and we'll see you hopefully in some live videos along the way for both the Architecture Hour podcast as well as potentially Right Attitude and elsewhere. So people hopefully stay tuned. So my guest today has been Stan Ecklund. Stan, thanks for joining me from California.
Well, Tim, it's been my pleasure. I'm happy to do this anytime you want.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, y'all. All right, Stan, I thought that was really good. What do you think?
I was cool. It's amazing that an hour can go by that fast.
Isn't it crazy?